Okay, good morning. Last morning, so we're on the home straight. Just a few more sessions for all of you, hopefully. My name is Kerry Kirkham. I'm a sales engineer with InterSystems, and this morning I was trying to figure out how I was going to introduce the topic, don't turn a drama into a crisis. And funnily enough, I woke up yesterday morning to 4 or 5 emails from one of my own customers. They have an Ensemble instance running, and there was in the email there was a few comments. They had some issues, but one of the interesting comments in the email was they actually said that looking through the log, the console log, they had found some problems that had been written to the log the night before, right? And really, that in essence is what I'm going to try and talk about in the next 45 minutes. Issues had been detected internally within Ensemble, written to the log, and it was only when it manifested itself somehow to them, to a user, to whoever was working on the system, that they then were able to look in and take action. And in part of that process, they managed to find that, issues had actually happened 12, 24 hours earlier and been written to a log file. But nobody knew about it, nobody did anything about it. So really that's what I'm going to be talking about for the next 45 minutes. Don't turn a drama into a crisis, right? Things happen, but if they go unaddressed or aren't taken care of, then that process, the longer it goes on, the more chance you have of something escalating into something far, far more serious. So really, that's the essence of what I'm going to be talking about for the next 45 minutes or so. Just any show of hands of how many people feel, or I presume most of you are Ensemble users or are doing something with Ensemble. So how many people feel they have the processes and alerting and everything else in place to handle all of these scenarios or issues that come up? Yeah. Most people always feel that they don't, right? You can always do more. So hopefully, at the end of this session, you'll have some ideas of where you can go or what you can do or things you could certainly take a look at within your own situation. So to introduce, oops, my clicker's gone a bit crazy. So problems are going to happen, okay? If you have Ensemble running, Ensemble, in its very nature, in most instances we have with customers and clients, it's reliant on other systems. It interfaces to other systems. So issues are going to happen. So that's the first thing to understand. You are going to get issues. So how are they going to be addressed? How are you going to deal with them? What processes and procedures have you got in place to handle those when they come up? The goal here is to minimize them. Okay, so when they do happen, you want to make sure that they can get addressed in a timely way, maybe do it so that the impact on actual users, people who are working on the system, feel the least pain. And even within your own IT department, again, you want things not to escalate, not to become a real problem, because then it's going to take up your own resources and you're going to have to deal with a more serious scenario. So that's really the goal here. How do you achieve it? Well, the key is that early detection. Okay? The very scenario that I got emailed about yesterday morning, the monitoring, the actual information was there. It had been found. I mean, it was notified. It was written to a log file, but nobody was aware of it. Nobody did anything about it. It wasn't addressed until it had become more serious issue, etc. So really getting that early detection and finding a way that you can address the problem is the key to what we're trying to achieve here. Oops. So like I said, log files filling up is not sufficient. Okay? When you stand up Ensemble and you build your interfaces, even without doing anything yourselves, without building in any functionality to handle these scenarios, automatically a lot of information is going to be monitored. A lot of information is written to log files. The question is, what do you do about it? Are you looking at them? Are you addressing those issues? Okay? Dashboards. People love dashboards. You have a dashboard up there and it turns green when there's an issue with your production or with something in Ensemble. That's great. Is anybody looking at the dashboard? I mean, all these scenarios are great when you put them in place, but they have to be practical. They have to be scenarios that are going to work for you and are going to address any problems that potentially are going to come up. So I'm going to have a look at a real-life scenario. So everything I'm talking about here are things that happen at customer sites and things that we have seen. It's not all at the same site, so it's kind of an archetypal scenario based on a number of sites. The clicker's causing problems. So we have a customer, and you can imagine this customer, they have Ensemble installed, and over time their reliance on Ensemble is growing, right? They're putting more and more interfaces into Ensemble. It's becoming more and more critical to their operations. So it is critical that things are running well, are resilient, and available, etc. They still have a number of point-to-point interfaces. So initially, this is a scenario we see all the time, maybe in your own case. You know, you have this scenario where over time you build up your point-to-point interfaces, and then you decide, let's address this, let's install Ensemble, let's build a common interface somewhere where we can build and manage and grow our infrastructure. But it takes time to bring those legacy interfaces into Ensemble. In this case, slower than they would have liked. The version is also becoming old, okay? We know we always try and encourage everyone to keep up to date, to upgrade as best you can, but they have an older version of Ensemble. It always got put on the back burner. It's something that they've neglected perhaps over time. Another common scenario we see is a lot of the interfaces that have been put into Ensemble have been put in by third parties. Okay, they haven't had the skills and the expertise to do it in-house, so they've gone out to third parties or the vendors to build those interfaces. And as a result, they don't have a common methodology. Okay? A number of different vendors for different interfaces. And this is a bit of a legacy of the point-to-point scenario where, you know, I have all these interfaces, I've started to move them into Ensemble, but I've gone to different vendors for different interfaces. So there's no common methodology used within the Ensemble infrastructure. And that can lead to issues, as we'll see. The question then becomes, who supports Ensemble? If you have 2, 3, 4 vendors, all responsible for different interfaces, who ultimately is responsible for the Ensemble instance? Who's the first person that needs to be called? Who's the first person that needs to address the issues as they arise? Okay, so who's really driving that? In this case, it's a hospital. What about the hospital themselves? Do they have the skills in-house to be able to determine what the system is like, how the system is performing? If issues arise, how do they address them? Who's looking after this? At what point in time do they realize they need to go to one of the particular vendors to address the issue with a given interface? So the question arises, who do they call? Okay? So it's a kind of a complex infrastructure, lots of potential issues there. So this is actually a sample incidence that did happen. Okay? So within one of these sites, a scenario arose where an A&E clinician was admitting a patient. So they admit the patient on their patient admin system. And then moments later, they go to look at the patient through a web application that they have, and the patient isn't there. The reason the patient isn't there, they know they have this system working away under the covers that is responsible for adding the patient to the web application. So what do? They call the IT department, and their instruction to the IT department is systems down. Something's wrong with Ensemble. I've heard of this Ensemble engine working under the covers. What's up? What's up? The IT department, limited in the skills, okay? So they don't really have great expertise in being able to look through the system, being able to figure out where the issues lie, what the problem is. So what do? They start to engage with the vendors who they think the interface, what particular interface the issue is with. Which vendor do they engage with? Again, more problems. What they ultimately do is they broadcast a message to all the vendors involved. So then, you know, typically it's an email. Email goes out to 3 or 4 different vendors. You know, something's wrong with this interface. Can you take a look? And very, very quickly, this starts to escalate into a real problem. The result, of course, is very varied. Occasionally, yeah, you might see a vendor will look at this and say, "Now that's my interface. I recognize what the problem is there." They fix it. They resolve it. What about all the other people who are alerted to this problem, who are notified of this? Do they all get let know that the problem is resolved? Often not, in actual fact. Okay? So in many cases, there's no resolution. So calls ensue, and they end up having these conference calls. And very quickly, there's an explosion of communication, waste of time, waste of resources. Okay? Now, this may sound like an extreme example, but examples like this aren't untypical. In fact, the very email I got yesterday went out to 4 or 5 different people, a couple from different vendors who were involved in this particular site. Okay, so really you can see there's a lot of issues to be addressed here, and not all technical. Okay, and we'll discuss that. So the question you have to ask is, you know, is this something that could be resolved in a much more timely way, much more quickly, and with little or no impact to the users? Okay, was this something that did something get written to a log file 12 hours ago, as was the case yesterday, which if somebody had known about, none of this scenario would have happened. So that's really what the essence of what we're going to talk about is. How do we create and build an environment where these kind of scenarios just don't happen? or happen as rarely as is reasonable. The result of this is, and this is one of the vendors involved in this particular site. I asked them to tell me how it had looked for them, and this is a couple of years ago. They had 45 support issues logged with them, and the breakdown was, I think the most common issue was disk issues, but they had application problems, interface issues, data queries. They replicated their patient admin system, and there were issues there, etc. So lots of different problems, maybe very common. I don't know, you may recognize a few of these or things that have happened within your environment over the last 12 months or so. But when we looked in a little bit further, we realized that really a lot of these issues did start with something relatively minor. That really, if you had addressed it early, problems could have been addressed before they escalated, before they started to impact users. Okay? So really that's what it's all about. The key is early detection, and on detection of the problem, how do we ensure that the right person gets notified? Again, finding that information being written to a log file is all well and good, but who is the appropriate person to be alerted to that information, who's going to be able to deal with and address the problem? Okay? So early detection of the problem and notifying the correct person. So what can we do? Well, clearly we need to alert the right person as early as we can, as early as that information is first detected within the system. So, key to that is monitoring. Okay? So before we do any alerting, we need to ensure that we're monitoring, we have sufficient monitoring in place. Not only that we have sufficient monitoring, but we're monitoring the correct things and looking around the right metrics, gathering the right information to find out when is it worthy of actually generating alert and letting somebody know when something is up. Okay? Once the monitoring is in place, we can now detect the problems. You then need to ensure that the alerting procedures are in place to notify the correct person depending on what the issue is. Okay? In the scenario I described earlier, multiple vendors, is it possible to set up a scenario that automatically will detect which interface the issue is with, who should be alerted? Can we go straight to the vendors, alert them, have them log on to the system without even members of the IT having to get involved initially in the first instance? Really get to the root of the problem and alert the right person in the most timely way. As you can imagine, a big part of this is not the technical side, but it's having the right policies in place. Okay, in our scenario with the hospital, if the IT department gets a call to say that there's an issue potentially with the interface engine, how well trained, how well do they understand the issue? Are they able to go through their own set of processes to figure out where the issues are, where the issues lie? Or are they, this idea that they end up sending out this blanket email or this blanket to all the different, that's really not good enough. They should have much better policies in place to ensure that they are able to handle and deal with the issues as they come in a much more efficient way. So a lot of it is driven around the policies that you have in place. I'm not going to spend too long talking about the monitoring side, but clearly you need to, if you're going to be alerted to an issue, you need to know the issue has happened in the first place, and that's driven around having sufficient monitoring in place. There's lots of monitoring built into the Ensemble infrastructure. The Ensemble System Monitor, for example, gives you a very, very good high-level overview. But as I said before, monitoring and having these dashboards that give you these nice views are great, but how often do they ever get looked at? Who's looking at these dashboards? People typically show them when they're showing them to somebody else to say, look at this. So, it's not something that is sufficient in terms of how you actually approach your monitoring. Within your own production in Ensemble, clearly there's a lot of different things in there that you need to be able to set your monitoring around. Setting the right sensitivity is really key here, okay? There's built into the infrastructure is the ability to say, how many messages do I typically expect to build up in a queue, for example? How many seconds should a message be on a queue before it gets processed? What's reasonable, okay? How long does a business component in Ensemble maybe sit there without actually doing any work? Is it reasonable that it could be there for 10 minutes and have no messages to process? All these settings are particular within the production. They're very particular to each component within the production. So this is not something that you can typically sit down, set all these things and go, that's great, now I'm happy with that, I've put all that in place. It's something that you have to, that evolves over time and that you will tweak and you will spend time figuring out what is the best setting for a lot of these things. But this is at the core of the monitoring within Ensemble. Again, there are lots of graphical representations we have that you can look at within the production, what queues are building up, what components are active, what components are in trouble, for example. So they are useful. Often these things are what get used when that call comes in. So when we receive the call saying, my patient never showed up in my web application, this is often where you'll start to go. And that, again, feeds back into the policies. Do the people who receive that call in the IT department have the knowledge to be able to go through these various steps and figure out where the problem lies, where potentially can I start looking? Enterprise tools, again, not something I'm going to go into in detail, but if you've got multiple Ensemble productions, multiple Ensemble instances dispersed, there's enterprise tools that allow you to view and get a good high-level view of what's happening. And of course, then there's some industry standards. So we support SNMP, for example, if you want to build that into your greater monitoring picture within the environment you're working in. Just a quick word, again, it's something you may or may not know is in Ensemble. It's quite recent in Ensemble. It's something that a lot of customers of ours have built themselves over time before it became available within the product, is the ability to see what the activity and like what's happening within Ensemble, what's typical within Ensemble. Often, we get a call, or the support department will get a call about some issue in Ensemble, and they'll have a look at the system, and they'll put in some monitoring in place, and they'll see, they'll gather some statistics. And then the question becomes, is this normal? Is this something that you typically see? Well, the answer often is, well, we don't really know because we've never, gathered all these statistics. We don't know our baselines. We don't know what should be happening well enough. So being able to do this is really valuable. Again, it's after the fact always, but you should have a good idea what normal operating is for your within your system. So maintain a record over various periods of time of what the activity within the system is. So this is now built into Ensemble. It's something you can configure, set up. What does it do? Essentially, it collects data about message volumes. Okay, this is what you're interested in. What are the typical message volumes I receive, depending on time of day, depending on over a weekly, monthly, etc. Very little overhead involved in it. And then you can build your own metrics. So we gather, a lot of information in terms of message information, but clearly you want to have the ability in there to gather your own metrics, whatever you're particularly interested in. And what ultimately happens is we store this, we persist it, we put it in tables, and then you can easily query this information and find out what you expect to see over a period of time with regards to statistics, etc. A variety of granularity as well. What are you interested in? Are you interested in what's happened in the last 5 minutes, the last minute, the last hours, days, weeks, months, etc.? So you can again vary the granularity and look at the statistics you've gathered over a variety of different times. So we have a number of persistent tables that allow you to do that. Essentially, there's 3 tables in the statistics gathering piece. We gather information every 10 seconds, wrap that up, store it in the table. We also gather an hourly rate of activity and a daily rate. Okay? So this is all rolled up and put into these tables, and you can query it and analyze it later. It's all done in a single transaction. We roll this information up together, and then write it into the appropriate table as it happens. What we're measuring is essentially pretty straightforward stuff, but it's very, very useful. Okay, so we're measuring the number. What's the number of messages? What's the count of messages going through the system in these particular time intervals? What's the response time? How long does a message take within a component in Ensemble to get processed? Okay, so what is the response time within that component? And then the queue time. How long do I see messages sitting on my queues? What's typical? What can I expect? And the result is, and you can get to this through the management portal, yeah, a nice dashboard. I've already put down the value of dashboards, but this gives you a nice dashboard that allows you to see, within a production, within a component, what the typical activity is over a variety of time periods, and you can see averages, durations, there's standard deviations, etc., that you can view and monitor within your production. And this is really good. This is information that you need to know. You need to have a good idea of what the baselines are within your installation of Ensemble. Okay, so monitoring, very, very key, something you need to be aware of, and something that it's not something you do and you're done with. It's something that you'll typically change. Again, all those different criteria that you can set, they're key within both your production and within all the different components within your production. Once you find, or once something has arisen, or once the monitoring has alerted you to something, what happens next? Okay, so clearly the key in all of this is when a problem is being detected, how is that problem going to be, how is the notification going to go to the appropriate person about the issue that's just arisen? So that's driven around alerts, okay? And again, there's no one answer to any of this, okay? The level of alerting that you implement within Ensemble is really different from installation to installation, from environment to environment. So what's right for you? What is the right level? It may be possible that, in fact, writing all these alerts to a log file is sufficient. I think that's unlikely, but that may well be the case. If that's what you want to do, you're done. That's done automatically. Ensemble always writes all the alerts that get generated within your production to your log files. More typically, though, you want to send alert notifications when these alerts arise to a user or a set of users or a group of people, depending on the nature of the alerts. So really, again, what is it that you want to do? Do you want to send them to the same group of users? Do you want to have different groups of users, depending on where the alerts, which component they get raised in? Do they want to go to, my scenario in this hospital where you have multiple vendors, clearly, depending on where the source of the alert is, you want to send those alerts to different places, and it may again be to multiple users. Sending alerts is great, but again, just because somebody was alerted to something really doesn't mean that they've done anything about it. Okay, so the kind of the level that many people would like to get to is the level where not only are these alerts being generated and sent to the appropriate place, but they're being monitored, they're being tracked. Have the alerts made it to the right person? Have they done anything about it? Have they acted on it? If they haven't, what do I want to do now? They haven't acted on this alert that was sent out 3 or 4 hours ago. No action's been taken. What do I want to do now? Do I want to raise another alert? Do I want to escalate the issue, etc.? So there's a framework built into Ensemble that allows you to manage your alerts. And just as a matter of interest, show of hands anybody who's used the manage alert framework within Ensemble. Okay, so it's not that many. I mean, this is the people enjoy figuring out how they're going to architect their solution, building interfaces, getting all the functionality in place. This is the error trapping side, right? This is the bit at the end where you need to ensure that actually it all works really well. But time spent doing this is really going to save you a huge amount of problems potentially. So, what are alerts within Ensemble? Most of you will know alerts are messages. So within the Ensemble messaging engine, it's a particular type of message. It's generated within the production, and your alert messages are automatically written to the log file. So if you search through your log files, you will find all the alerts that have been generated within your production. Great. You might find alerts that were generated weeks, days, months ago. The other thing that's interesting, or the other characteristic of an alert message in Ensemble within an Ensemble production is it gets delivered and sent to the component within your production that's named ens.alert. Okay, so you name a component within your production ens.alert, and all alert messages are sent to that component. What is ens.alert? Well, it can be anything it's derived from a class, and really it can be any class that you want. Okay, so it's up to you to decide what you want to make this ens.alert component to be. Typically, it's a component that's an operation that can send out email, for example. So people very often think, yeah, my alerting is going to be driven around, when issues happen, I want to make sure I email the correct person. Okay. Again, emails are great, but what happens? Are those emails read? Are they acted upon? Probably more commonly, this ens.alert component is built to be a class which is a business process derived around rules. So when these alert messages come in, the rules engine can interrogate the message, see where did it come from, what is the error message, etc. And then within this rules engine, it can decide where am I going to ultimately send these alerts and what am I going to do with them. Okay? So a very typical scenario is that it's a business process that's driven around rules and how to handle these alerts. The final thing that you can make, and I'll talk about quite a bit towards the end of the session, is you can make this ens.alert component a alert manager. Okay, and this is where we get into this managed alert scenario. Okay, sending out alerts, fine, but being able to manage those alerts, see if they're acted upon, see if they're being addressed, that's really where you want to get to in most cases. But simple alert routing is a good place to start, okay? It really is. When you stand up your Ensemble instance, putting in even a simple infrastructure where you have rules-based routing of the alerts and you send email out. You send emails out. That really is. That's a very, very good first step. You can send out the alerts selectively to whoever you want, to specific users. Back to my hospital, right? Multiple vendors. I want to make sure that I'm alerting the correct people in each instance. And the logic you implement to do that is derived from a variety of different ways, right? So as most of you know, built into Ensemble, we got the rules engines, data transformations, etc. So you can really build quite a sophisticated set of rules in there just for routing and sending alerts to the appropriate place. Again, time of day, that's important, right? I mentioned about message volumes. You know, how long do you expect messages to be on a queue? How long do you expect inactivity for a component to be? Like, typically that can hugely vary based on the time of day, right? I mean, during working hours, processing a lot of lab results, whatever that may be, weekend volumes are going to drop significantly, okay? So you can build these rules into your alerting mechanism, and they vary depending on time of day, so they're related to a calendar, for example. Also key to this is, it's all very well sending the alerts, because I mentioned earlier, the organization must have implemented policies for addressing and solving the problems. Okay, sending out that alert is not sufficient. Okay? In order to implement it, make use of all the traditional data transformations, etc., and capabilities built into Ensemble. Very simple example. Okay, this is my component within my production. It's the component I've named ens.alert, and an alert message has been generated through some component within the production, gets sent to ens.alert. What does it do? Again, make use of rules. Okay, so this rule is simply saying, if I get an alert message coming in, I'm going to perform some sort of transformation on the message, okay, and then I'm going to send it out to an email operation, so it's going to fire an email off. Question is, who do I want to email? Okay, did this alert message come from a component which was built by vendor A, or a component that was built by vendor B, for example? Okay, again, real-world scenario. That's the scenario we have in this particular site. So I can look at the email. I can look at the message, and based on what the source of that alert message is, I can go to a lookup table and say, well, if this came from component A, I'm going to send it to this email address. If it came from component B, I'm going to send it to a different email address. Very, very simple, very, very straightforward, but very effective. I mean, think about the scenario and the help desk. They're looking, the guys, they don't have the knowledge to look through Ensemble and figure out where the information is, where the error came from, what the issue is. Right here, doing something very, very straightforward, you are automatically alerting the correct people depending on where the origin of that alert came from. So what does the transformation do? It very simply interrogates a lookup table. Okay, I've just pulled this straight out of our samples, the ENS demo namespace in Ensemble, and you can see all this lookup table does is say, what's the key? What's the source for this alert message? Based on that, I'm going to specify an email address that I ultimately want to send this alert off to. Okay? This is step one. This is really good. If you've implemented this, you're doing quite well. You've actually, at least you're getting information out there. People are getting alerted. It's appropriate for the alerts that are getting generated within the system. So what happens? The alert request gets sent off to the appropriate or to the email operation with the appropriate address for whoever needs to be notified about the issue. Okay? Problem is, what happens next? Just because you're alerted to something doesn't mean you do anything about it. I don't know if you've noticed, I'm kind of limping around a little bit. I played in the soccer tournament 2 years ago, twisted my ankle and spent 3 days limping around Global Summit, right? I was alerted to this fact, through pain in my ankle. 2 years later, here I am limping around again because I played in the soccer tournament again. I don't know why I played in it again, but I did, right? So, just notifying somebody or letting them know there's an issue doesn't mean they do anything about it, right? So this is really where you want to get into the managed alert scenario, okay? So what are managed alerts? Well, this is the most sophisticated approach, and this is something that if you introduce, there's a whole framework built into Ensemble to allow you to create these managed alerts. It's all done through the system management portal. There's a UI-based interface that allows you to go in, have a look at all the alerts that have been generated. Who have those alerts being assigned to? Have they been assigned to somebody? What actions have been taken around those alerts? Have they been dealt with? How long have they been open? When is the next action supposed to be taken, etc.? So there's a really quite sophisticated framework around this. Routing rules still apply, so a lot of what you've built with your standard kind of routing and sending out alerts, all that works the same. We can still apply all the rules. But really what happens is we have now built-in capability to send reminders. Was this acted on? Do I need to send a reminder? Do I need to send it off to somebody else? Okay. Clearly this hasn't resolved. If that initial alert didn't get acted on, do I want to escalate it and send it somewhere else? So there's escalation rules built in. Okay. So there's this notion of an escalation level. What's the level of alerting needed? And then, of course, after the fact, you want to find out how we do. Okay, how many alerts were generated, were they acted upon, were they solved within a timely manner, etc. So what we do is, in order to implement this, what you need to do is you need to add a couple of components to your Ensemble production to handle this. Okay. The alert manager being the first one. So what is the alert manager? I mentioned earlier, the alert manager is the component within the production that you're going to call ens.alert. Okay, so it's a specific instance of ens.alert. And what does it do? Similarly to before, any alert that gets generated within Ensemble is going to go here first. Okay, so it goes to this alert manager. So it receives all of the alerts generated within the production. And what it does is it takes them and it converts them into this notion of a managed alert. Okay? So it converts them into a managed alert and then typically assigns an owner. So somebody is now responsible for this particular alert. It's now the onus is on them, okay, to handle and deal with it. And what does it do then? It sends it to this other component within Ensemble called the notification manager. The notification manager, pretty straightforward in essence, in idea. What it does is it receives these managed alerts, and then based on how you configure it, it sends them out to whoever you configure to send that alert to. Typically an email, maybe a pager, maybe an SMS, etc. Okay? That's the responsibility of the notification manager. The notification manager sends it to a particular alert operation. This is like any other operation that you will have configured. There's nothing particularly special about it. Again, what sort of operation do you want it to be? Do you want it to send email? Do you want it to be a pager, etc., SMS message? And maybe multiple of those, okay? So you can, again, in the same way we did before, depending on the source, depending on the message, depending on the time of day, you want to send it to a different place with a different priority, a different owner, etc. The last optional component that you need to include within your production is what we call the alert monitor. Okay? And it's the alert monitor that is responsible for querying the production to see, are there any outstanding alerts out there? Are there outstanding alerts that have passed the time by which they should have been acted upon and I need to do something about it? Okay? So it's this alert monitor that does things like escalates the alert, maybe directs it to a different person, a different target. Okay, so this is the piece that sends out the reminders. For any of you who've looked at Ensemble and gone into, created a new production, for example, you may well know that one of the options you get is you can make it a HL7-based production. If you do, we populate it with a few components that you typically would use in the environment of building a HL7 production. What I've done is I've just simply taken that and added the components you need to add around the alert, the managed alerts. So my alert manager in this case looks exactly the same. It's just a business process called ens.alert, but behind that, this particular component is the alert manager. So it's responsible for taking these alerts and converting them into a particular type of alert that is the managed alert. What does it do? It sends it to the component that's the notification manager. This guy is responsible for receiving these managed alerts and then appropriately sending them to the correct destination, whatever that business operation is. Typically, it's your alert operation. Okay? Most commonly, it's going to be email, as I mentioned, or pager. Here, I just wrote it out to a file because whenever I configure these email things, invariably they don't work when I come in to do demonstrations with them. So this is just writing it out to a file. And the last optional piece is the monitor. Okay, you don't need to include the monitor, but if you want to build in the capability to be checking on all these alerts that have got generated and maybe escalate them, then you want to include this piece also. So while we have a moment, let me show you quickly what this actually looks like. So here's my production. So you'll notice just straight off, the alert monitor, I've disabled it actually on the outset because you in effect don't need the alert monitor to generate managed alerts. So what I'm going to do is, this is a very, very simple production. Again, this is the production that it's a standard in ENS demo, by the way, for just passing a HL7 message through a router. So what I'm going to do is, the destination here is this file operation. And what I'm going to do, easiest way to generate an error or an alert, is to create a file that doesn't exist. So I'm going to change this file path that it wants to write the messages out to one that doesn't exist. And I'm going to affect that. So now when I go to drop a file through here, so here's a HL7 message. And I'm going to put this in here. Hopefully, okay, so very straightforward, gets picked up. We know we're going to get an alert because the file that it's trying to write it to doesn't exist. So if I go and have a look at this, you'll see that here's my most recent message. Let's see, okay. So this is what it looks like. So here's my message has come in. And you'll notice the normal processing for this production is it passes this message through the router and then tries to write it out to a file. Okay, we've generated an error. So let's have a look at the error. And you can see here the error is telling me that the source doesn't exist. So apologies for the resolution here. It's in essence telling me that the file here doesn't exist. Okay, there's my error message there. So what the production does is it creates this alert request again. This is very normal in any given production. And it sends the actual alert message to this component called ens.alert. Because this is a managed alert, it actually, in this case, takes this and creates what we call this managed alert. And you can see this is the actual contents of this new managed alert, okay? It's got some unique properties to it. For example, who owns the alert, okay? One of the key things is who's the owner of this alert? What's the escalation level of this, okay? Initially, I've set it to 0, right? So this is a normal alert. It's monitored, somebody owns it, and it's going to them. So it goes through this notification manager and then gets ultimately sent out to whatever you configure your alerts to go to. Again, this is just writing it out to a file, but typically you'll be sending an email or this out to a pager. And really, that's what the managed alert framework allows you to do. And again, if I simply refresh this, you'll see that in actual fact, this guy has now generated a few more of these because it's kept retrying. So all the normal things that you configure within your production, within a component, try and write it out to this file. What are the settings around this component? How often is it going to retry? What's it going to time out at, et cetera, et cetera? They all still apply. Okay? The only thing that's changed here is that when that alert does get generated, it's now going to be managed and sent to the appropriate person with an owner, with an escalation level, et cetera. I mentioned it's UI driven, so I can come into Ensemble here and I can see, have a view of managed alerts. And here we have my new managed alerts here. You can see it's generated a few alerts. I can click on these guys, have a look at them, see the time, see where they were generated, see what the actual alert is, who's the owner, et cetera, et cetera. So this kind of gives you that overview of the alerts that exist within the system. And then for me personally, this alert was assigned to the user underscore system. So I can come in here under monitor and have a look at my managed alerts. And you can see here, I've now have these 5 new alerts. 3 of them are overdue, 2 of them today, et cetera. And actually, because of the times I set in, you can see this is actually changing. I've specified if it lasts for 2 minutes, it becomes overdue, et cetera. So that wouldn't be typical. But this is where you come to come in and handle and address the alerts that get generated. The last thing I just want to show you quickly is within this same production, I can now, if I turn on this alert monitor, so I'm just going to enable this guy, and when I enable the alert monitor, it's going to now see the alerts that have been generated within the production, and it's going to check, are they overdue? Who's being assigned to them? Do I need to do anything about these? Do I need to look at them and resend them to somebody else and escalate them, et cetera? So again, now that this guy is running, I can come back in and I can have a look at my, if I go and look at my managed alerts, you can see the escalation level has now risen, okay? I specified a rule in here that said, if these alerts aren't handled within 2 minutes, escalate it again. If they're not handled in another 2 minutes, escalate it again. So again, very, very simple rule that you can just implement here. You could also assign them to a new owner. You could send them out to a different group, etc. Okay. Notice that they've all now moved from today into overdue, okay? So again, based on the timeouts, based on what you specify with them, you can configure this. Okay. So this really is what it looks like. Any business component within your production, right, can raise an alert. Okay, so a component within your production generates an alert. That alert gets sent to your alert manager, the component in your production named ens.alert. That alert manager receives that message, receives that alert message, typically assigns an owner to it, and sends it off to the notification manager. You can see initially we've got a status of open. This is monitored and an escalation level of 0. Okay, this is a newly generated alert. The notification manager then sends it out to whoever it's configured to receive that particular alert. Okay, and it may be again that they just get an email. They receive an email, maybe they're not looking at the email, they don't do anything about it. It goes beyond the time that it's supposed to being addressed within. So the alert monitor kicks in, recognizes that there's an alert out there that hasn't been dealt with in a timely way, it's still open. So it escalates it and resends it. Okay, so now we've got an escalation level of 1. It's raised it and sends it on. Then hands it off, maybe to the same user again, just with a new escalation level, or maybe to a different user or somebody else who's going to address the problem. Hopefully they deal with it, and once they deal with it, it's incumbent on them to actually close the alert and say, yes, I've dealt with this, and I'll close the alert. Okay? Okay. A word of caution. This all sounds great. We're going to start generating all these alerts. I'm going to send them out. Life will be good. We'll know exactly what's happening in the system at all times. This happens quite regularly, and it's happened certainly at a few sites where they implement this, and first off, they just generate a whole bunch of alerts. Even what I did very simply there was 5 or 6 alerts got sent out. So you have to be careful. Don't flood people with alerts and notifications, because what happens is, immediately, they're going to start ignoring them, right? You can't possibly find them. My inbox, every time I look at my inbox, I get a whole bunch of alerts. Alerts are fine, and actually some alerts send you information that is something that, yeah, it's not that urgent, I can deal with it, it's something I'll address it next week or in a few days. I've got something more urgent that I need to get on with. So just be careful. You need to spend time configuring these alerts that they are appropriate, they get sent to the right people, and you get the right number of them. What is truly urgent? What is critical? How am I going to send those out in the right way? So you need to find a balance. What requires urgent attention versus, yeah, good to know, I need to keep an eye on that. And again, mentioned this before, system activity varies time of day, time of week, etc. So what's appropriate for early on a Thursday or Wednesday morning very typically will not be appropriate for the weekend, for Sunday, etc. So you can build that into your rules where it's based on time of day, week of day. Policy is very, very important. This is still not going to work if you don't implement the correct policies around it. We had a scenario with a customer where they implemented all their alerting. It was all working really, really well. People were getting alerted. Problems were getting addressed. Yeah, very nice. Then, of course, they went through a period of a week or more and really no information, no alerts. The initial reaction was, great, we've really got our system under control here. Everything's working superbly. When, in further investigation, when they still received none, the email server had been changed. So the outbound component wasn't configured. It was configured to the old email server, right? So that's just something. You need to have coherent policies across the organization where things like this are avoided, okay? However you implement these, it's not something that should be in the hands of developers. Developers, we like to think we can do everything and fix all these problems. But really, policies around how you're going to alert, who you're going to alert, who's going to handle them, who's going to address them, it's not something for the developer. This is something that needs to be owned by somebody senior, somebody in management, and then this is distributed down to whoever's working within this Ensemble environment, okay, and beyond, okay? An email server gets changed, everybody needs to know about that. That's something that needs to be built into the policy so these issues don't arise. Okay, named people responsible. Who is responsible for this? Who's responsible for alerts that go over here? Alerts that arise based on different criteria. Who owns them? Who can escalate them, etc. There needs to be a chain of responsibility around this. The vendors must be informed. Okay, back to our hospital. We have 3 or 4 vendors implementing an interface. They all need to build in the same level of procedures, alerting, using the same mechanisms, this is something that they need instruction from. If you're going to come in and implement something in my Ensemble instance, I'm going to tell you this is how it needs to be done. You need to ensure that when you build this, it adheres to these policies and these procedures. Okay? And again, that's driven from a management level. Other policy, alerting is great, but again, as I said, alert could be generated and somebody finds out there's an issue, but you need to have people trained appropriately for what it is they have to do. Okay, can they handle the initial triage of the problem? Can it be addressed through them? So the last thing, and to finish up, you may, I created this instance of a hospital. Everything that they experience, it's not all, as I mentioned, it's not all the one place, but a lot of the things they're pervasive. They happen at different levels in different places. So a good thing to do is figure out what are the issues that have bitten you in the last 6 weeks, months, whatever period of time. And when people ring up the support department and say, we've had this issue, whatever it may be, and it's happened to us, a bunch of times before. Well, if it's happened a bunch of times before, surely there's something you can do, something you can build in to alert you to prevent that from happening again. Okay, so it's a really worthwhile exercise to figure out what are the things that have impacted my instance. What are the things that have bitten me? Is there steps I can implement using the functionality that in the alerting framework, for example, to prevent? And it could really be just around policies that you implement and nothing that you have to do within Ensemble at all, in actual fact. And that's it. Any questions?